Hi, friends, and welcome to our class on Confucianism and Taoism. Let's start with probably one of the biggest thinkers in all of human history, and certainly one of the most influential for the greatest number of people on earth, and that would be the philosopher Confucius. He was born around 550 BCE. His father was a powerful warlord. His mother, though, was a servant girl, and they were not married. So there was kind of a shadow cast over him from his very birth. And after his father died, not surprisingly, the legitimate wives shunned his mother and him and cast them out of the estate, where they had to struggle very hard to survive. Confucius, according to legend, was very large and an ugly, shy child. As he grew, he didn't stop being large. He grew to, legend says, about 6 feet tall, which was pretty darn big for China at that time. In fact, it was almost freakish in the place and time where he lived. His mother loved him desperately, however, and saw that he had an aptitude for learning, and she really wanted to encourage this. Fortunately, he really loved learning. He was a fierce autodidact, and he devoured entire libraries, remembering most of what he read. In fact, his hunger for learning was almost insatiable. Confucius is reported to have said, "Study without thinking, and you are blind. Think without studying, and you are in danger." His studies led him to some very unorthodox conclusions. He came to believe that noble birth does not actually convey nobility. It is noble deeds, he says, that make a person who he or she is, not one's bloodline. So he believed that all people could be educated, and once they were educated, well, then the lines between the social classes would basically disappear. Confucius said, "When one has more substance than culture, one is a rustic. When one has more culture than substance, one is of the literatus. Only when one has both substance and culture is one an exemplary person." So, when he was still a young man, Confucius began a school where he welcomed all people. Well, okay, let's be honest. It was a very patriarchal society at the time. So he welcomed all men. But that being said, he did welcome them regardless of their social standing, which was some progress. And he insisted that they all treat each other as equals. He taught his students that what they were doing was forging a new aristocracy, one that was based on noble character, not noble birth. Now, as radical as his ideas were, you would think that people would shun him, but that is not the case. People flocked to him. Even students from the nobility flocked to him. But this didn't really satisfy Confucius. He longed for a government post, someplace where he could put his radical ideas into practice on a larger scale. So then, Duke Deng of the country of Lu made Confucius an offer that he could become the governor of a province. Finally, Confucius says, a chance to try out some of my ideas. So, of course, he said yes. And initially, people chafed over some of his ideas because they were pretty weird. But soon they began bearing fruit. The common people became prosperous, they were happier, and the crime rate just plummeted. And you would think other governors would go, "Hey, what's he doing? Let's try that out." But that's not what happened. The other governors were not pleased at all, and Confucius soon found that he had larger, more political problems to face. his enemies didn't attack him straight on. I mean, they didn't like raise armies. They did it slyly. Legend says they sent a harem of beautiful women to distract Duke Deng so that he would not notice what Confucius was doing. And, according to legend, it worked. Deng lost all interest in Confucius and his reforms, and soon Confucius found himself out of a job. So he spent the next 15 years or so wandering around China, always with a few students in tow, but for all of his success as a teacher, he was heartbroken because what he really wanted was another chance to wield government power and do some real good in the world. And then, in the year 484, a former student called him to the provincial court for an interview with the ruler. And you would think, go, Confucius, here's your chance. But, did he bow and scrape and watch his tongue? That would be too much to hope for. He did not. So when the ruler asked him, how do I find honest officials? Confucius answered, you should try being honest yourself. As you might expect, he did not get this job, and once again he took to the road. He taught for the rest of his life, always wandering, always wishing for another chance, but he didn't get it. And he finally died at the age of 73, in his own estimation, a failure. Now, although he edited a great number of ancient works, he didn't actually write very much down. In fact, we don't have anything that he wrote down from his own hand. But fortunately, his teachings were not lost because his disciples, after he was gone, wrote down all that they could remember, and they put them all together in a book that we call the Analects today. And the Analects contain most of what we know of Confucius's main teachings. So, just what were those main teachings? Confucius said, to be respectful without manners is tiresome. To be circumspect without manners is timidity. To be brave without manners is wildness. To be straightforward without manners is strangling. So, one of the main concepts that Confucius presents is the concept of li. Now, usually, li is translated as rights, R-I-T-E-S, but this is really an anemic translation. Li is a much more robust term than simply rites or rituals. What it refers to really is all social ritual. So it's almost like a dance that people do with each other out in civil society, and its main goal is to create and maintain harmony within society. So I'll give you an example of that in a minute. Confucius taught that all things are ordered by heaven, and so all things are meant to move in these harmonious orbits. All things should interact in harmonious ways, and that only happens when all things know their proper place and behave in proper ways. So, for instance, when a ruler walks into a room, everyone else in the room should do what? Well, they should genuflect or bow or put their head on the floor. When that doesn't happen, disharmony results. People get upset, and some people get their heads chopped off. It's very unpleasant for everybody. But if everyone in the room knows that they're supposed to bow, and everyone does it, it's like a beautiful choreographed dance. The king walks into the room, everybody bows, the king feels honored, and he can take his throne, and everything can go on with a feeling of harmony and order. So harmony reigns, and everyone involved can find honor and fulfillment. So the ruler finds honor and fulfillment because he is respected, just as heaven demands. The servant finds honor and fulfillment because he or she is able to carry out his or her duties and be good at what he or she does. Nobody gets their heads chopped off. Everybody's happy. So the key here is education. People must be educated about all the proper societal structures, all the rules, all the rituals that are demanded by heaven so that harmony can reign. Harmony in one's own life, in one's family, in one's community, and in one's country. So here's another example of Li. Think of a handshake. How many steps go into a handshake? We think of it as such a simple thing because it's something that we do every day, but in fact it's not. It's actually a very, very complex ritual. A handshake is Li. A handshake is a ritual that we carry out in order to create and maintain harmony in our society, in our interpersonal relationships. So what would happen if you went to shake someone's hand and the person did not look you in the eye? That person would not be fulfilling his or her Li properly, and you would instantly feel disharmony. So learning how to perform the rituals and performing those rituals properly brings harmony to our relationships. And we have lots of Li in our own society. So once again, if a judge walks into a courtroom, everyone stands up. This is Li. The thing is that Li is largely invisible because we just know it and we just do it. We don't really think about it. It's kind of the cultural ocean that we swim in, and yet Li is everywhere. And when someone doesn't know the Li, when someone doesn't know the ritual, everybody notices and everybody gets really tense. Have you noticed? Let's talk about the rectification of names. In the Analects, Confucius relates a story. The ruler of a certain state asked Confucius about government. Confucius replied, "Have leaders be leaders, have administrators be administrators, have fathers be fathers, have sons be sons." The ruler said, "Good! Of a truth, if leaders do not lead, administrators do not administer, if fathers do not behave as fathers, and sons do not behave as sons, then even if there were grain, how could I eat of it?" In the next chapter, Confucius says, if the names we use are not correct, then language is not in accordance with the truth of things. If language is not in accordance with the truth of things, then our affairs cannot succeed. When affairs cannot succeed, manners and music do not flourish. When manners and music do not flourish, punishments will not be properly awarded. When punishments are not properly awarded, the people do not know how to move their hands or feet. Therefore, a superior person considers it necessary that names are spoken appropriately, and also that what he speaks may be carried out appropriately. What the superior person requires is just that in his words there may be nothing incorrect. So, for Confucius, part of making sure that all things are ordered as heaven demands means correcting those things that have gone astray. Confucius was appalled that people were not respecting the roles that heaven instituted in the world. And so he set out to correct it by means of education. So here's the problem as he saw it. Rulers were not acting like rulers. Subjects were not acting like subjects. Fathers were not acting like fathers, daughters were not acting like daughters, wives were not acting like wives, younger sons were not acting like younger sons, and so on. Confucius insisted that Damn it! People should respect their roles and act like what they were called. Thus, the rectification of names. If you are called father, Confucius says, then act like a father. Demand respect and wield authority over your family. If you are called wife, then act like a wife. Respect your husband and serve his needs accordingly. If you are called younger son, then act like one. You know, giving your older brother the best of all things, bowing to his authority. If you're a ruler, then act like a ruler, governing your country with compassion and justice, not drinking and taking from the poor like a common criminal. Now, to us, this kind of structure of society, a hierarchical structure, a patriarchal structure, sounds pretty unjust and pretty harsh. But what Confucius felt he was trying to do was to return people to a time when they were ruled by what he called Jin, or human-heartedness. In fact, he says that heaven demands that all our affairs be ordered by Jin, by human-heartedness. And part of that is affording people the respect that they deserve and treating the people who are not ruling, but those who are serving, with dignity at the same time. So let's talk about Jin, human-heartedness. A disciple asked Confucius about humaneness. Confucius said, "Just love people." And then the disciple asked him about knowledge. Confucius said, "Just know people." The disciple didn't understand. Confucius says, "Promote the honest, placing them over the crooked, and you can cause the crooked to straighten out." In another place, the disciple asked Confucius, "If one can be generous to people and help them and can help the masses, then how is that? Might you call that humaneness or human-heartedness?" Confucius says, "Someone like that would not only be humane, but would surely be a sage." As for the humane, while they want to be established themselves, they establish others. While they want to succeed themselves, they help others to succeed. They can draw lessons from nearby. These can be called the methods of humaneness. Now, we might translate humaneness or human-heartedness as kindness or compassion or love. But like most translations, when we try to do that, something is lost. And the best I can do is clunky, a humanistic affection for all people just because they're people. Confucius said, "When I am with a group of people all day and the conversation never touches on matters of justice, but inclines to the exercise of petty wit, I have a hard time." I think it's important when considering the wisdom of someone like Confucius to see them in the context of their time and culture. C.S. Lewis warned against what he called chronological snobbery, of applying our own sense of morality and justice to people in the past, when in fact they were ruled by a very different sense of morality, lived in a very different culture, and had very different ideas about what was proper. So we have to be careful not to judge them by our own standards, and at the same time, we must look at them critically and um, think about what they said that has wisdom for us today and what they said that does not. Some of what Confucius said sounds very wise, and some of it sounds very patriarchal and very unjust. Nevertheless, it's important to see him in the context of his culture and his time. He was not a man of our time after all. And in the time that he was teaching, his teachings were very radical indeed, and one could say almost egalitarian. Now, this is not true where gender roles are concerned, but it certainly is true as far as class and societal caste. So that's enough about Confucius for now. Let's move on to Lao Tzu.